The paper trembled in Clara's hands. Her smile, uncertain but hopeful, faltered as she read the crooked letters of her name. Around her, the sound of muffled laughter grew. Soft at first, then sharper, like glass cracking in slow motion. Across the counter, Ethan leaned casually against the nurse's station, his grin widening. Behind him, two others tried and failed to hide their amusement. "Oh, honey," he said with mock sympathy, tilting his head slightly. It was just a joke. The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel, wrapping around Clara like cold water. Her throat tightened, her chest rising and falling as she tried to understand what was happening. The fake certificate crinkled beneath her fingers. It had all looked so real. The border, the seal, the promise of recognition. Laughter burst fully now, no longer hidden. One of the nurses wiped a tear of laughter from her eye. "You should have seen her face," someone whispered. Ethan chuckled, clearly proud of his performance. "Relax, Clara. We just wanted to lighten the mood. You take things so seriously." His smile was perfect, the kind that hides rot beneath charm. Clara forced herself to breathe. The laughter seemed to echo from far away, distorted, unreal. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her eyes stung, her pulse raced. She could only stare at the paper in her hands, her name, misspelled, stamped above the hollow title, "Most Obedient Nurse." The letters blurred through her tears, her lips parted in a trembling smile, an instinct of survival. I see," she whispered, voice barely audible, but the tremor in her chin betrayed her. Ethan laughed again, softer this time, sensing victory. "Come on," he said, stepping closer. "Don't be upset. It was just a little fun. You need to loosen up." The way he said it, casual, confident, made the cruelty worse. Then a sound interrupted the laughter, the slow, deliberate click of a door opening. Dr. Harris stepped inside. His presence shifted the air, quiet authority filling the space where mockery had lived. The room fell silent, except for the faint hum of machines and Clara's uneven breathing. Ethan straightened, clearing his throat, his easy smile faltering under the surgeon's gaze. Dr. Harris didn't speak at first. His eyes moved from Clara's trembling hands to the fake certificate, then to the faces of those around her. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, too calm. "Who made this?" No one answered. Ethan looked down, pretending to adjust his badge. Clara said nothing. She couldn't. Without waiting for a reply, Harris reached for the paper. Clara hesitated, then handed it to him, her fingers shaking as she let go. He studied it for a moment, then tore it cleanly in half. The sound, a soft rip, echoed louder than any shout. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. From inside his coat, Harris took another document, real, official, embossed with the hospital seal. He placed it gently in Clara's hands. "The real acknowledgements," he said evenly, "are earned through respect, not laughter." The words were quiet, but they filled the room like thunder. Ethan's smirk vanished. Clara looked down at the paper, her real name, her real merit, her real worth, and her tears finally fell. Not from pain this time, but from release. Around her no one spoke. The laughter had died. In its place, only truth remained. And in that silence, dignity took its first breath back. The door closed behind her with a muted click, sealing her away from the sound of laughter. The hallway stretched ahead, white, sterile, and endless. Clara walked without seeing, the certificate pressed to her chest, her breath shallow and trembling. Her reflection in the glass panels beside her looked foreign, a stranger wearing her face. Somewhere behind her, a faint chuckle echoed, then faded. Inside the restroom, the world finally stopped. The fluorescent light buzzed softly above, flickering over the tiled walls. Clara gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection, eyes red, lips trembling, dignity unraveling one heartbeat at a time. She turned on the faucet, not to wash her hands, but to drown out the sound of her own breathing. The water ran cold and clear, sliding over her fingers. She pressed her palms beneath it, as though the sting could wash away the shame. It was just a joke. Ethan's words replayed in her mind, poisonous and smooth. How easily he had twisted cruelty into humor, how easily others had followed. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away, refusing to let the pain win. Her grandmother's voice rose faintly from memory. The kind are tested hardest, Clara. That's how heaven tells them they're needed. She wanted to believe that, but right now, kindness felt like weakness, and dignity felt too heavy to carry. She looked up again at her reflection, the same gentle eyes, now shadowed by disbelief. "Why do they hate softness?" she whispered, but the mirror had no answer. Outside, footsteps passed, quick, careless, unknowing. The world continued, untouched by her small disaster. She straightened slowly, wiping her face with a paper towel, her hands trembling less now. The mask she'd wear tomorrow began to form, calm, capable, composed. But under it, a quiet fracture deepened. In the corridor, Ethan's voice drifted faintly from the staff room. He was laughing again, this time about something else, someone else. For him, the joke was already forgotten. For her, it would echo for days. Clara paused by the corner, unseen, and listened to the cadence of his confidence. Every word reminded her that cruelty didn't always shout. Sometimes it smiled. She walked away before her anger could bloom into bitterness. Her shoes clicked softly against the floor, steady and slow. Each step became a vow she didn't yet understand, a promise to rise, even if she didn't know how. She reached the locker room, opened her small metal door, and stared at the photo taped inside. Her grandmother, smiling with patient warmth. "I wish you were here," she murmured. Her fingers brushed the picture's edges, soft from years of touch. "You'd tell me to forgive, but I don't know if I can." The whisper caught in her throat, fragile as a prayer. She folded the real certificate, the one Dr. Harris had given her, and placed it gently inside the locker next to the photo. The hum of the lights above filled the silence. Clara sat for a long while staring at the floor. The hurt still pulsed inside her, but beneath it, something steadier began to take shape. Not anger, not pride, but resolve. She realized she didn't need to prove Ethan wrong. She only needed to keep being herself. That would be her quiet rebellion. When she finally left the room, the corridor was empty, washed in the dim glow of evening. She paused by the window, watching the city shimmer under the pale sky. Her reflection looked back at her, wounded but unbroken. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I'll go back, not for them, for me." And somewhere deep inside the stillness, a small spark of strength began to breathe again. The morning sun filtered through sheer curtains, painting the kitchen in shades of amber. The air smelled of coffee and soap, the scent of home. Clara, still in her pajamas, hummed softly as she helped her grandmother knead bread dough. The older woman's hands moved with patience, guiding hers. "Medicine isn't just about science, my dear," she said gently. "It's about love that refuses to quit." Back then, life was quiet. Their small farmhouse sat at the edge of a sleepy town, where the loudest sound was the wind through the wheat fields. Clara grew up watching her grandmother care for neighbors with nothing but herbs, warm words, and prayer. It was there she learned that healing wasn't power, it was service. And service, done with love, was sacred. When her grandmother's health began to fade, Clara stayed by her side through every long night. She learned to take blood pressure readings, prepare meals, and whisper comfort through pain. She watched how dignity could remain even when the body failed. On the day her grandmother passed, Clara held her hand and promised through tears, "I'll take care of people the way you took care of me." That promise carried her to the city years later, a stranger among towers of glass and steel. Nursing school was harder than she imagined, but she studied with the same devotion she once brought to the small kitchen table. She couldn't afford books sometimes, so she borrowed, shared, improvised. Her grades weren't perfect, but her patients never forgot her. When she got her first hospital job, she was terrified. The machines hummed like something alive, the doctors moved like they owned time, and she was just a face in pink scrubs trying not to shake. But she worked hard, arriving early, leaving late, remembering every patient's name. "You'll go far, Clara," a senior nurse once told her. "You care too much. That's rare." In those early months, she met Ethan, charming, confident, already adored by everyone. He had the easy arrogance of people who'd never had to struggle. He cracked jokes that made others laugh and flirted with the doctors without fear. "You're too serious, Evans," he told her once. "People like you burn out fast." She had smiled politely then. She didn't yet understand how right he'd be. Still, she admired him in a way. His confidence, his voice, his unshakable ease in a place that terrified her. They started on the same shift rotation, and for a while he even seemed kind. He helped her with charts, complimented her diligence. But kindness from men like Ethan always came with edges. He liked to remind her that he was faster, sharper, more noticed. "You're sweet," he'd say, "but sweet doesn't win." Clara never competed. She didn't need to. Her satisfaction came quietly, from holding a frightened patient's hand, from comforting families during long nights. She never realized that her sincerity bothered him. Every praise she received from a doctor, every thank you from a patient, made Ethan smile a little tighter. Envy doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits. Weeks before the humiliation, she began to notice his jokes changing tone. They weren't playful anymore, they tested boundaries. "You're everyone's favorite, aren't you?" he'd tease with that half-smile. She would laugh it off, unaware that resentment was gathering like rain behind his eyes. People like Ethan needed control, and he hated how much light she carried without trying. Now, as she sat by her window remembering it all, Clara understood the pattern she had missed. The fake award wasn't born in a single moment of cruelty. It had been growing for months, watered by jealousy and pride. She closed her eyes and whispered to the memory of her grandmother, "You were right. The kind are tested hardest." And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the test anymore. The morning after the prank, the corridors of St. Matthew's Hospital felt colder. Clara walked in early, uniform crisp, hair tied back neatly, every motion deliberate. Her face was calm, too calm for someone still bleeding inside. She could feel the eyes on her as she passed. Whispers followed, but she didn't slow down. She had work to do. At the nurse's station, Ethan leaned casually against the counter, sipping his coffee. His usual grin returned the moment he saw her. "Back already," he said lightly. "Guess you're tougher than you look." His tone was playful, but the smirk beneath it was venomous. Clara met his eyes briefly, then looked away, choosing silence over reaction. He hated that. Her composure was supposed to crack. He wanted guilt or anger, anything to prove she could be shaken, but Clara simply checked her charts, noted the vitals, and moved toward the patient rooms. Her hands were steady, her posture straight. The only thing trembling inside her was pride, held tightly in place by restraint, Dr. Harris noticed. From down the hall he watched as Ethan joked with another nurse, his laughter too loud for the quiet ward. Then his eyes followed Clara, who bent to adjust a child's blanket with slow precision. There was a stillness about her, a kind of grace that silence protects. She's stronger than they think, he murmured. By mid-morning, the day had found its rhythm. Clara moved from room to room like a steady heartbeat. A patient smiled at her, whispering, "You're the only one who listens." She smiled back, and for a moment the noise of humiliation faded. It was in caring for others that she remembered who she was, not what they had done to her. During lunch, Ethan sat across from her in the break room. "No hard feelings, right?" he said, leaning forward. "I mean, you have to admit, it was kind of funny." Clara stirred her tea without looking up. "It was cruel," she said softly, "but if it made you feel bigger, I'm glad it helped." His smirk faltered, not from guilt, but from confusion. Kindness was a language he didn't understand. When she left the table, Ethan stared after her, unsettled. There was something in her calm that made him feel smaller. People began to notice, too, how she never spoke ill, how her patience made the noise around her seem childish. The rumor mill slowed. Mockery doesn't survive long in the presence of quiet dignity. Later that evening, Clara stayed after her shift to help the janitor restock supplies. She folded linens, wiped counters, and hummed softly, unaware that Harris stood at the doorway watching. He didn't interrupt. He only nodded to himself, as if confirming a silent truth, that integrity isn't proven in grand gestures, but in the moments no one is meant to see. Ethan passed by, catching the scene through the glass, Clara working, Harris watching. Something sharp twisted inside him, something dark and familiar. He told himself it was irritation, but beneath it lay envy, the kind that festers when cruelty fails to crush its target. For the first time, he wondered if he'd chosen the wrong person to laugh at. When Clara finally left, the hospital was quiet. The street outside glimmered with the reflection of streetlights on rain. She paused at the door, breathing in the cold air. Behind her, the building loomed like a test she hadn't yet finished. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "I'll do it again." And with that, she stepped into the night. Wounded, yes, but undefeated. The days passed quietly, almost too quietly. The hospital had learned to whisper around Clara, as if shame itself lingered in the corridors. No one mentioned the prank anymore, but silence can bruise more deeply than laughter. She walked through each shift with grace, her smile subdued, her eyes calm, yet when she washed her hands between patients, she still saw them tremble in the reflection of the metal sink. Ethan pretended not to notice her anymore, but he did. Every time she passed, every time she greeted a patient, something twisted inside him, a feeling he couldn't name. She should have been angry. She should have quit. Instead, she carried on, unshaken. That quiet strength gnawed at him, the way truth gnaws at a liar. One afternoon, Clara stood by the window of the recovery ward, sunlight outlining her profile in gold. Ethan walked by and paused, watching her adjust the sheets of an elderly man who smiled weakly in thanks. The scene was simple, tender, and it infuriated him. How could she still be kind? How could she still care after what he'd done? Later that day, he overheard two orderlies talking near the supply room. "I heard Harris stood up for her," one said. "Guess he's got her back." The other replied, "He should. She's the best nurse here." Ethan's jaw tightened. The resentment, once playful, curdled into something uglier. He laughed it off, but the sound came out hollow. Clara, meanwhile, was in the locker room, folding her uniform with slow precision. She overheard laughter down the hall, Ethan's voice, loud as always. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in anger, but in exhaustion. She had forgiven him silently, but forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It only teaches you how to carry it without letting it crush you. When she stepped out, their eyes met in the corridor. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy with things unsaid. Ethan smirked faintly, a reflex more than an intention. "Long day?" he asked, voice low, casual. Clara nodded once. They all are. Her calm tone left him nothing to push against. That bothered him more than hatred ever could. That evening, Dr. Harris found her restocking bandages alone. "You're still here?" he asked softly. She smiled. "There's always more to do." He studied her face, tired but serene, and realized that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through exhaustion. "Don't let the noise of others make you doubt your worth," he said before leaving. His words stayed with her. At home, Clara sat by her window, the city lights flickering like faint stars. She thought about the day, about Ethan, about the endless effort it took to remain kind in a world that confused cruelty with power. She closed her eyes and whispered, "He doesn't get to change who I am." The whisper steadied her heartbeat, slow, firm, forgiving. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the laughter from the prank echoing back in his mind like a ghost refusing to leave. It didn't sound funny anymore. It sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. For the first time, guilt crawled in, not sharp, but slow, persistent, like a shadow he couldn't outrun. And somewhere between the noise of his conscience and the silence of her peace, a subtle shift began. His cruelty had revealed her strength, but her strength was beginning to reveal his weakness. He didn't know it yet, but the joke that had humiliated her was about to become his lesson, the one he'd spend the rest of his life trying to understand. The hospital glowed under fluorescent light, sterile, bright, indifferent. Another week had begun, but nothing felt routine anymore. Clara's presence, quiet and steady, had become a mirror for everyone's conscience. Even those who had laughed at her prank now avoided Ethan's jokes. The air around him had changed. His laughter, once magnetic, now sounded misplaced. He noticed. Every silence was louder now. Every kind word given to Clara cut through him, like a reminder that cruelty doesn't erase goodness, it amplifies it. He tried to act as though nothing was wrong, but the hallways felt narrower, the stairs sharper. Pride kept his shoulders straight, but guilt whispered behind him wherever he walked. Dr. Harris had begun to watch him, not with suspicion, but with that measured calm that unnerves the guilty. Harris believed in discipline, not punishment, yet he saw something in Ethan's restless behavior that worried him, the tremor of a man at war with himself. "Pride," Harris once said to a colleague, "is the heaviest infection of all. It eats the healer first." Clara, unaware of the quiet tension around her, continued her work. She arrived early, stayed late, spoke softly to patients who feared the night. Her dignity had become its own kind of defiance, the kind that doesn't need words. She never avoided Ethan, but she never sought him either. To her, forgiveness was no longer a choice. It was a way of surviving. One afternoon, Harris passed the nurse's station and overheard Ethan arguing with a technician. His tone was sharp, defensive. "I don't need anyone questioning how I do my job," Ethan snapped. The technician muttered an apology, retreating quickly. Harris stepped forward. "Control your tone, Mr. Cole," he said evenly. "Leadership doesn't sound like anger." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. That night, as rain streaked the windows, Clara stayed to help a patient whose monitor kept beeping. She didn't see Ethan watching from the end of the hall, his expression unreadable. There was something almost haunted in his eyes, the first cracks of conscience breaking through his pride. He turned away before she could notice, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Later, in the locker room, Ethan overheard two nurses whispering. "Doctor, Harris wants her on the palliative care team," one said. "Says she has a gift." The other replied, "Maybe this is how things were meant to be." He clenched his fists. Her rise, her quiet, graceful redemption, was everything he didn't want to see. His pride began to turn cruel again. The next morning, he replaced her name on the shift board with his own, reassigning her to tedious rounds. "Staffing adjustment," he told the others casually. No one dared to challenge him, not yet. But Harris noticed the change an hour later. You altered Nurse Evans's rotation, he asked calmly. Ethan shrugged. Efficiency. The surgeon's eyes narrowed, but he only said, be careful what you call efficient. When Clara saw the change, she didn't protest. She simply nodded and carried on, moving through the dullest tasks with the same quiet grace. To her, dignity wasn't about where she worked, but how she worked. Still, the sting was real. Not from humiliation this time, but from the realization that some wounds heal slower in others than in oneself. That evening, Harris found Ethan alone in the staff lounge, staring at the rain. You think she's weak because she forgave you, Harris said quietly. Ethan turned, startled. I never asked for her forgiveness. The older man smiled faintly. You don't need to. She already gave it. That's why you can't look her in the eye. And before Ethan could reply, Harris walked away, leaving the truth to echo louder than the storm outside. The day began in peace, the kind of peace that always precedes a storm. Clara walked the corridor, humming softly, her clipboard pressed against her chest. The hospital lights shimmered pale gold, calm and forgiving. She paused by a patient's bed, adjusting the blanket with care. You'll feel better soon, she said, smiling gently. The boy squeezed her hand. Then the alarm screamed. Code blue, room 312. The sound cut through the air like a blade. Clara dropped her chart and ran, heart pounding. The corridor blurred, white walls, echoing footsteps, the world collapsing into urgency. She burst into the room and saw the patient convulsing, the monitor flatlining in bursts. Her body moved before her mind caught up. Gloves on, suction ready, adrenaline loaded. Clear! Someone shouted. The body jolted. The monitor beeped. Once, twice, life returning in hesitant rhythm. Clara exhaled, trembling, as the chaos softened into control. She held the patient's wrist, feeling a pulse fight its way back. Around her, relief spread like dawn. Good job, a doctor murmured. For one fragile moment, she thought the worst was over. Then Ethan walked in. His eyes were sharp, calculating, searching for something, someone to blame. Who prepared this line? He demanded. Silence fell. Clara looked up, still catching her breath. I did, she said calmly. Ethan lifted the saline bag, the label half torn. Then you made an error, he said coldly. This dosage isn't standard protocol. Her stomach dropped. That's not possible. I checked it twice. Her voice cracked slightly, not from guilt, but disbelief. Ethan's tone didn't rise. It didn't have to. Check the log, he told the others, as if performing for an invisible jury. Murmurs started. Doubt slithered like smoke. Clara looked around, seeing uncertainty spread across faces she once trusted. By afternoon, the whispers were everywhere. She almost killed someone. Harris can't protect her forever. The lies traveled faster than truth could breathe. Ethan signed the incident report, his handwriting steady, surgical. Clara watched him from across the hall, her heart sinking as she realized he was choosing his pride over her humanity. The meeting that followed was mercilessly short. The director's voice was smooth, detached. Doctor. Harris stood silent beside the window, fists clenched at his sides. Pending investigation, the director said. You are suspended without pay. Clara's breath left her body in a shudder. Please, she whispered, check the camera footage. It wasn't me. No one answered. She unclipped her badge slowly, the motion deliberate, reverent, like laying down a piece of her soul. Her hands shook, but her eyes stayed dry. Doctor. Harris took half a step forward, wanting to speak, but the director's look froze him in place. Clara placed the badge on the table and whispered, Thank you, for the opportunity. Then she turned toward the door, still upright, still dignified. Ethan stood in the hallway when she emerged. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, hers full of disbelief, his full of something worse, regret disguised as authority. "I'm sorry it had to be you," he said softly. She blinked, the tears finally breaking free. "No," she replied, "you're not sorry, you're scared." She walked past him without another word. Outside, the rain had begun, a thin, steady curtain falling over the city. Clara stepped into it, the drops clinging to her hair, her uniform, her trembling hands. Behind her, the hospital lights flickered like false stars. "If truth has a voice," she whispered, "let it find me." And as thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the city, Dr. Harris stood alone by the window, watching her fade into the rain, and silently swore that the storm she deserved would not be this one. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Clara set her keys on the table and sank into the nearest chair, her body folding in on itself. The city's glow pressed faintly through the curtains blurred by rain. On the counter, her badge and ID lay side by side, useless now, relics of a world that had turned its back on her. Her hands shook as she reached for a glass of water. The reflection in the window stared back, pale and hollow. The woman who looked at her no longer resembled the nurse who ran toward every cry for help. "Suspended," she whispered, tasting the word like poison. The silence answered with indifference. Somewhere below, a siren wailed, and it felt like the city itself was mourning. She opened her grandmother's old drawer, pulling out the worn rosary she hadn't touched in months. The beads felt smooth and alive between her fingers, familiar in a way that hurt. "Are you watching, Grandma?" she murmured. "Because I don't understand anymore. I did everything right." Her voice trembled, the prayer dissolving into a sob she tried to swallow. The walls of the small apartment seemed to close in. On the table sat a half-eaten sandwich from the morning she'd left for work, the last day she believed the world was fair. She pressed her palms to her face, the tears hot and heavy. "Maybe they're right," she whispered. "Maybe being good isn't enough." The words hung in the air, too fragile to take back. She stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside. The rain painted streaks of light down the glass, each drop a mirror of her sorrow. Below, strangers hurried through puddles, umbrellas tilting against the wind, lives untouched by her small tragedy. She envied them their ordinary pain. Hers felt sacred, unbearable, too pure to name. From her coat pocket, she drew out the real certificate, the one Dr. Harris had given her after the prank. The paper was creased, soft at the edges, but still intact. "For unwavering compassion." The words blurred as tears welled again. "Compassion," she repeated bitterly. "And what did it earn me?" She almost tore it in half, but her hands froze because she remembered his eyes when he handed it to her, calm, knowing, believing. The real honors are born from respect. That memory cracked something inside her. Not hope. Something deeper. Faith, maybe. She folded the certificate carefully and placed it beside her grandmother's rosary. "Then let this be my test," she whispered. Hours passed. The tea she made grew cold, untouched. The clock ticked louder than it should have. Outside, thunder rolled softly, as if the heavens were breathing. Clara lay down on the couch, her thoughts looping in tired circles. The room smelled faintly of lavender and rain, the scent of her childhood, the scent of comfort long gone. She thought of Ethan, his smirk, his voice, the moment he said, "I'm sorry it had to be you." The words stung more than the lie itself. Somewhere beneath her anger, she felt a flicker of pity for him, a man so afraid of his own smallness that he'd rather destroy someone good than face himself. That pity scared her more than hate ever could. When sleep finally came, it was light and restless. Outside, the rain softened to mist, the city sighing under dawn's first light. In her dream, she stood in the hospital hallway again. But this time, no one laughed. The walls were silent, the lights dim, and a single voice whispered through the stillness, "Hold on, Clara. Morning always finds the kind." The morning came softly, like forgiveness disguised as light. Clara woke to the muted hum of the city, her body heavy from a night of broken sleep. The air smelled faintly of rain and coffee grounds. For the first time in days, she didn't rush anywhere. The hospital no longer needed her, or so she thought. She sat by the window, watching the world move on without her. When the mail slid through the slot, she ignored it at first. Bills, ads, a folded newspaper, nothing that mattered. But one envelope stood apart, handwritten, slightly trembling, addressed to Nurse Clara Evans. Her name spelled right. Her pulse quickened. She turned it over, but there was no return address. Something about it felt gentle. She opened it slowly, afraid the moment might break. Inside was a letter written in uneven script, the ink smudged by shaky hands. "Dear Nurse Clara," it began. "You probably don't remember me. I was the old man in room 214, the one who couldn't sleep through the night. You sat with me, told me stories, and made the machine sound less frightening." Her throat tightened. The words kept flowing, fragile but full of life. "I wanted you to know that I'm home now. The doctors say I'm healing faster than they expected. But truthfully, I think it's because of you. You reminded me that the sick still matter." A tear slipped down her cheek, landing softly on the page. It blurred the next line. "The world needs more hands like yours." She pressed the paper to her heart and closed her eyes. The ache inside her didn't vanish. It softened like ice learning to melt. For the first time since her suspension, she breathed without pain. Somewhere a voice, her grandmother's maybe, whispered, "You see, kindness always circles back." Clara smiled through her tears, a quiet, trembling smile. Later that afternoon, she dressed simply and walked to the park down the street. The world felt different. The same trees, the same sky, but lighter. She sat on a bench near the fountain, watching children chase pigeons and an old woman feed crumbs to sparrows. Every sound was a small reminder. Life goes on, and sometimes it waits for you to catch up. Meanwhile, in his office, Dr. Harris unfolded the same letter. The patient had sent 2 copies, one to Clara, one to the hospital. He read it twice, then placed it on his desk beside her suspension notice. The contrast burned in his chest. "Compassion beyond duty," he murmured, reading the words aloud. "And we called it negligence." His jaw tightened. He rose, looking out the window where rain still clung to the glass. For the first time in weeks, resolve began to bloom beneath his calm exterior. He thought of Ethan, the easy laughter, the hidden cruelty, and felt a slow, deliberate fire rise in him. Some truths, he decided, deserved to be loud. "It's time," he whispered. As the sun began to set, Clara returned home. The letter sat on her desk, next to the folded certificate and her grandmother's rosary. Together, they looked like 3 small pieces of faith, fragile but indestructible. She traced the handwriting again and whispered, "Maybe this isn't the end." Her reflection in the window seemed to nod back at her. That night, she lit a candle beside the letter. The flame flickered, painting gold across her tired face. "Thank you," she said softly, not to anyone in particular, but to the world, for remembering her. The wind outside brushed against the window like a quiet blessing. Somewhere beyond the city, destiny had started to move again, and this time it was moving toward her. The hospital looked the same, polished floors, humming lights, the familiar rhythm of healing. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Dr. Harris walked through the halls with a new stillness, a purpose measured in silence. In his briefcase were files, statements, and a printed copy of the patient's letter. Compassion beyond duty. Those words echoed louder than the hospital's machines. He began to retrace the events of the incident. Shift schedules, dosage logs, supply room access. Every thread led back to Ethan. The camera footage told more than paperwork ever could. A brief flicker, a careless moment, a saline bag swapped before rounds began. Harris leaned back in his chair, watching the timestamp. "So it was you," he whispered, his calm voice colder than anger. Meanwhile, Clara volunteered at a small downtown clinic, a place without luxury, but rich in gratitude. The walls were chipped, the supplies few, yet it felt more human than the hospital that had cast her aside. She changed dressings, calmed frightened patients, and laughed softly with children who drew her pictures in crayon. For the first time in weeks, her purpose felt pure again. The head nurse at the clinic watched her work with admiration. "You don't belong here," she said kindly. "You belong somewhere bigger." Clara smiled faintly. "Kindness doesn't need walls," she replied, yet part of her still longed for the place that had wounded her. Not for revenge, but for closure. Some doors must be closed gently, not slammed. That evening, Harris sat in his office under the faint hum of the air vent. The hospital director had just left after a tense meeting. "You're opening old wounds," the man had said. "The board won't like it." Harris replied simply, "Then they'll have to heal." Now, alone, he pulled open a drawer and laid out the evidence. Each page a piece of the truth Ethan thought he buried. He didn't plan to humiliate him. Justice, Harris believed, should cleanse, not destroy. Still, when he looked at Clara's suspension notice, signed under false claims, he felt a pang of shame for every second he had stayed silent. "Not anymore," he murmured. The hospital wasn't sick because of one cruel man. It was sick because people had learned to look away. Across town, Clara walked home beneath a bruised sunset. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, heavy but honest. She carried a paper bag with leftovers from the clinic kitchen, soup for the neighbor downstairs who lived alone. Her steps were slow, but her heart beat lighter than it had in months. Sometimes redemption begins in small kindnesses that no one sees. That night, Ethan found a note slipped under his locker door. "Report to doctor. Harris's office tomorrow morning. Urgent." His stomach tightened. He told himself it was nothing, but sleep refused to come. Guilt, once ignored, had started whispering again, clearer and louder than his pride. He closed his eyes and saw Clara's face. Not angry, just disappointed. It haunted him. At sunrise, Harris stood by his window, coffee in hand, watching the first light paint the hospital gold. In a few hours, the truth would finally breathe. He wasn't after vengeance. He wanted balance restored, not only for Clara, but for the institution itself. He thought of her working quietly somewhere in the city and whispered, "Hold on a little longer." Elsewhere, Clara sat by her window, reading the patient's letter again as dawn broke. The city shimmered awake, slow and forgiving. She didn't know that Harris was preparing to clear her name. She only felt a strange calm, the kind that comes before deliverance. "I forgive them," she said softly, and as she did, the world seemed to shift just slightly toward justice. The rain returned that morning, soft, rhythmic, and patient, like someone knocking gently at the world's door. In his office, Dr. Harris spread the evidence across his desk. Shift logs, security footage, testimony from the technician who'd seen Ethan in the supply room. Each piece fit together too perfectly. The lie had been tidy. Now the truth was even tidier. He sat back, staring at the grainy image frozen on the screen. Ethan swapping the saline bag with a careless flick of his wrist. The timestamp confirmed everything. Harris closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. Justice wasn't about punishment, it was about restoration. "You were right, Clara," he murmured. "Kindness doesn't break. It bends until truth catches up." That afternoon, Clara walked into the clinic, tired but lighter. She had begun to smile again, even if only for others. The rain had followed her there too, tapping softly on the old windows. When her phone rang, she almost ignored it until she saw his name, Dr. Harris. "Could you come to my office tomorrow morning?" he asked gently. "It's important." The next day, she returned to the hospital for the first time since her suspension. Every step through the corridor felt heavier, full of ghosts and echoes. Some staff members looked away. Others nodded faintly, uncertain whether to be kind or guilty. When she reached his door, her pulse raced. Harris stood waiting, expression calm but grave. "Please, sit," he said, motioning to the chair across from his desk. She obeyed quietly, her eyes scanning the room that had once felt like a sanctuary. On the desk lay a closed folder, thick with documents. "You wanted the truth," he began softly. "You deserve it." He slid the folder toward her. "The incident, the accusation. It wasn't your fault." Clara blinked, not breathing. "What?" Harris opened the folder, revealing the photos, the logs, the signatures. "Ethan altered the supplies that morning," he said. "The footage shows him clearly. I have the technician's statement too." Her hands trembled as she touched the papers, the proof she hadn't dared to hope existed. "All this time," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded, his tone both gentle and firm. "I haven't submitted it yet. I needed you to see it first." She looked up, confused. "Why wait?" Harris leaned back, folding his hands. "Because justice can save or destroy, depending on how we deliver it. If we expose him recklessly, the hospital will bury the story to protect itself. We do this right or not at all." Clara's tears fell quietly, more from relief than anger. "I don't want revenge," she said, her voice trembling but certain. "I just want to work again, to be free of this." Harris smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides sorrow. "That's why you deserve it. You want healing, not victory." He stood, walking to the window. Outside, the rain blurred the city into silver. "You'll have your name back," he said after a moment. "But you'll also have to face him, not in anger, but in truth. Can you do that?" Clara nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "I can." Harris turned to her, his eyes soft but steady. "Good, because tomorrow the board will hear the truth. And this time, it won't be whispered." As she left his office, the air felt electric, charged with something larger than both of them. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a sky washed clean and pale. She stepped outside, breathing deeply. For the first time in months, the world didn't feel against her. It felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for justice to finally speak. The conference room buzzed with low conversation, a nervous hum that carried guilt, fear, and curiosity in equal measure. Board members sat stiffly at the long table, faces neutral and guarded. Clara sat near the back, her hands folded, her breath measured. She could feel her heartbeat echo in her fingertips. Across the room, Ethan avoided her eyes. Dr. Harris stood at the head of the table, calm as a priest before confession. "Thank you for assembling on short notice," he began, his voice steady but heavy. "We are here to address a mistake, one that has stained not just a name, but the integrity of this institution." The word integrity made Ethan flinch, almost imperceptibly. Harris opened a folder and laid the documents neatly before him. 2 months ago, Nurse Clara Evans was suspended under accusations of negligence. Today, we know those accusations were false. A ripple spread through the room, a shifting of weight, of guilt, of attention. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Harris pressed a button on the remote. The projector flickered to life. On the screen, the grainy footage played. Ethan, in the supply room, switching the saline bag. His expression casual, his posture careless. The timestamp glowed in the corner. Proof that required no explanation. Gasps broke the silence. The screen froze on his face, illuminated under the pale hospital light. Ethan stood suddenly, his chair scraping across the floor. "That doesn't prove intent," he said sharply. His voice cracked under the strain. "It was an accident." Harris's gaze didn't waver. "Then why didn't you speak up when she was blamed?" Silence fell again, heavier this time. Ethan's lips parted, but no sound came. Guilt had stolen his breath. Clara stared at him, not in anger but in heartbreak. "Why, Ethan?" she asked softly. The question was simple, fragile and devastating. He looked at her, eyes darting away, shame flooding his face. "You made me look small," he said quietly, the words almost breaking. "Everyone saw you as better. I just wanted them to see you fall once." The confession hung in the air like smoke, impossible to hold and impossible to ignore. Harris sighed, the kind of sigh that carries both disappointment and pity. "And now," he said, "you've learned that pride always costs more than truth." The board sat in silence. No punishment was announced, only the sound of quiet realization filling the room. Clara stood slowly, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "I don't want him destroyed," she said, looking at Harris, then back at Ethan. "I just want this to end with honesty. We can't heal if we keep pretending we're perfect." Her words softened the air. For the first time, Ethan looked at her without pride, only regret. The director cleared his throat, his tone gentler now. "Nurse Evans, on behalf of this institution, we formally retract your suspension. You are reinstated, effective immediately." The applause that followed was quiet at first, then grew into something warm, human and clean. Harris closed the folder and looked at Clara, his eyes saying what words could not. "It's over." When the meeting ended, Clara stepped into the corridor, her body light as if released from gravity. Ethan stood a few feet away, eyes lowered. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She nodded. "Be better," she said simply. And as she walked away, sunlight broke through the rain-streaked windows, not dramatic, just real, like grace finding its way back into the world. The next morning, the corridors of St. Matthew's felt different. The same white walls that once echoed laughter now carried silence, a silence heavy with respect. Clara walked through the entrance, holding her badge again, the sunlight glinting off the small piece of plastic, like a medal earned in quiet battle. She wasn't nervous. She was home. Staff who had once turned away now stepped aside for her, their gazes soft and uncertain. A few whispered greetings, others simply nodded. She answered each one with grace, a smile that forgave more than words could. The air had changed, lighter, humbler, as if the hospital itself had decided to breathe again. Dr. Harris stood near the nurse's station when she arrived. "Back where you belong," he said, his voice warm beneath the usual composure. Clara smiled softly. "Thank you for believing in me." Harris shook his head. "Belief wasn't needed, Clara, only eyes." They shared a quiet look, the kind that binds two souls who've weathered the same storm. Later that day, an announcement rippled through the halls. "All staff, please gather in the main conference room at noon." The murmur that followed was filled with curiosity and guilt. Clara didn't expect to be part of it. She stood in the back of the crowd as Harris stepped to the podium, his presence commanding calm like gravity itself. He began without preamble. "We made an error," he said, his voice echoing softly against the walls. But in that error, we discovered something far greater, the measure of true character. The room stilled. This nurse endured humiliation and injustice with dignity and compassion. She reminded us all that integrity doesn't need applause to exist. He lifted a framed certificate, elegant and real. In recognition of grace under cruelty and courage under silence, we honor Nurse Clara Evans with the award for compassionate excellence. A hush filled the room. Even those who had mocked her lowered their eyes, faces flushed with quiet shame. "Clara," Harris said, "would you please come forward?" Her heart pounded as she stepped through the crowd. Every footstep felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she hadn't realized she'd lost. When she reached him, Harris handed her the plaque, heavy, golden, warm in her trembling hands. "This time," he whispered, "it's not a joke." She laughed softly, tears blurring her vision. "I know." Applause swelled, not wild, but reverent, full of gratitude and remorse. Some nurses cried openly, others simply pressed their palms together. For a moment, even Ethan, standing at the back, clapped. His eyes met hers briefly, full of quiet repentance. She nodded once, forgiveness offered, not spoken. As the sound filled the room, Clara turned to the staff and spoke softly, her voice steady through the tears. "I didn't survive because I'm strong," she said. "I survived because I refused to stop being kind. I hope none of us forgets how much that matters." The words landed gently, reshaping the air, not as a speech, but as healing. When the ceremony ended, Harris watched her walk away, sunlight pooling around her as if the world itself wanted to honor her. She didn't look like someone returning from war. She looked like someone who had taught peace how to stand again. And for the first time in a long while, every heart in the room felt cleaner. The applause had faded hours ago, but its echo lingered in every corner of the hospital. Clara walked the halls that night with quiet steps, her plaque tucked under her arm, her heart calm. The building, once a place of humiliation, now felt like home again, familiar, forgiving, alive. Even the hum of the lights sounded gentler. At the nurse's station, Ethan stood waiting. He looked smaller somehow, the confidence gone, replaced by a fragile honesty that made him seem human again. When she approached, he straightened, clearing his throat. "Clara," he began, voice low, almost breaking, "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." She studied his face for a long moment. The arrogance was gone. All that remained was a man standing in the ruins of his own choices. "You hurt me deeply," she said softly, "but I won't let that hurt define either of us." He looked at her, surprised. "You forgive me?" Clara nodded. "I already did, the day I stopped hating you." Ethan's eyes filled with tears he couldn't hide. "I thought breaking you would make me feel bigger," he whispered, "but it only showed me how small I was." Clara's expression softened, the weight of pity and grace blending in her gaze. "Then maybe that's how growth begins," she said. "When we finally stop running from what we've done." Dr. Harris appeared from the corridor, his voice warm but firm. "Both of you have learned something most people never do, that truth without forgiveness is just another wound." He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, then on Clara's. "Let this place heal from the inside, the way people do, one honest act at a time." The days that followed felt lighter. Nurses smiled without guilt. Laughter returned, softer, cleaner, kind. Clara began mentoring the younger staff, teaching them what books couldn't, how to listen, how to see people instead of patients. Ethan volunteered for double shifts, never complaining. When she thanked him, he replied simply, "It's my way of mending." One evening, Clara passed the children's ward and paused by a familiar bed, the boy she'd comforted months ago. He was awake, smiling. "You came back," he said. She sat beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "I always come back," she said. "That's what nurses do." His small hand reached for hers, and in that touch, the world felt right again. As the days turned to weeks, the hospital regained something it didn't know it had lost: humility. Dr. Harris noticed it everywhere, in the softer tones, the slower tempers, the gratitude in small gestures. He knew Clara had given the hospital more than her service. She had given it a soul. One afternoon, she found the fake award, the cruel joke, folded neatly in a forgotten file. She looked at it for a long time, then smiled. Instead of tearing it, she placed it in the trash gently, like laying an old ghost to rest. "Thank you," she whispered to the memory of that pain. "You taught me who I am." That night, she stepped outside as the sun dipped below the city skyline. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. She looked back at the hospital, its windows glowing like a constellation, and felt a deep, peaceful certainty. "They're healed," she murmured, "and so am I." The wind caught her hair, and for the first time she didn't flinch from the past. She smiled at it. Morning sunlight filled the hospital corridors like a blessing. It glowed against the white tiles, reflected in glass, and touched every quiet corner that had once held shadows. Clara moved through her rounds with unhurried grace, greeting patients with the warmth of someone who'd learned to see beyond pain. To her, each smile was worth more than any ceremony. "Doctor." Harris watched from a distance, arms crossed, the faintest curve of pride on his face. The institution had changed, not by policies, but by example. Clara had become a quiet legend, though she never called herself that. She spoke to the janitors with the same respect she gave the surgeons. Her humility commanded the kind of reverence no title could buy. Ethan, now transferred to another department, worked quietly, steadily. He no longer joked to be noticed. Sometimes their paths crossed in the cafeteria. They would exchange small smiles, the kind that say, "I remember, but I'm grateful we've moved on." His laughter, when it came, was softer now, honest. Remorse had reshaped him into someone better. Weeks passed. One morning, Clara found a small envelope on her desk. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a simple origami heart. The note read, "Thank you for forgiving me. You didn't just save my career. You saved who I might have become." She smiled through tears and placed it gently beside her grandmother's photo. It was, in every sense, the real award. That evening, she took a quiet walk through the garden behind the hospital. The flowers, newly planted, swayed in the wind, their petals trembling like whispered prayers. She crouched to fix a fallen bloom, her fingers brushing the earth with reverence. Around her, the world seemed to breathe in rhythm with her heart, slow, steady, healed. "Doctor." Harris found her there, kneeling among the flowers. "Still taking care of everyone, even the petals," he said softly. She stood and smiled. "That's the only way I know how to live." He nodded, eyes glinting. "The board wants to name the new scholarship after you. The Clara Evans Fund for Compassionate Nursing." She laughed lightly. "I'd rather they just treat people better." Later that night, Clara sat by her window again, the same one that had witnessed her despair. But now the city lights looked different, warmer, closer. She lit a candle beside the letter, its flame reflected in the glass like a tiny sun. "We did it, Grandma," she whispered. "We kept kindness alive." The words lingered in the room, wrapping it in peace. Her phone buzzed with a message from the clinic. "The children miss you. Come visit." She typed back, "Tomorrow." Closing her eyes, she leaned back, letting the quiet settle around her. She had no need for applause, no hunger for recognition. The greatest reward was knowing she had turned pain into purpose. Outside, the wind brushed against the window like an old friend. Somewhere, a siren wailed in the distance, not a warning this time, but a song of life continuing. Clara looked toward the stars and smiled. "Kindness," she whispered, "is the only thing that multiplies when it's given away." And with that, the story of her heart found its stillness. If this story touched your heart, leave a in the comments, give this video a like, and subscribe for more stories about kindness, courage, and redemption.